Look at her arm.
I told you it was an infection. I asked you for broad spectrum. You put her on the bare minimum.
This girl is spiking in temperature in the sky and has this rash, previous rigidity. You'd be very concerned about sepsis caused by a bacteria named meningococcus. Very excited to be reacting to House MD Season 3, Episode 9, Finding Judas. On this channel, we are reacting to all 177 House videos. This will be Episode 71. Let's see if I can get the diagnosis before House does as a doctor working in London.
Whoa, this is awesome. Alice, are you alright? Alice, are you okay?
Is that a symptom? A screaming child! I think House needs to widen his quota from one patient a week. Where does that rank on our House spicy symptom chart? Let's see, we've got pooping from the mouth up at 9.8. We've got seeing aliens up at 9.9. Ah yeah, and being sexually attracted to House because of fungal spores in your own brain up at 10.0. In all fairness though, it was a bit strange that she kept screaming after the ride stopped. It seemed like things were spinning even after the ride stopped, which could mean she has vertigo and was feeling dizzy. It could also just be lingering effects from a merry-go-round, so we're gonna need more clues on this one.
You're alone with her for 8 hours. She ends up in the hospital.
We're divorced.
Is there a problem?
I'm
sitting in there hoping it's a sniper because at least then the sociopath isn't my employee. Give me his pills.
Where's my prescription?
No more free-floating prescriptions. From now on, you get reasonable doses at reasonable times.
This is how we actually manage prescribing very addictive drugs in real life. For heroin users that are trying to come off it, there is a drug called methadone, for example, that has to be picked up and consumed in the pharmacy for every dose. Heroin users are a vulnerable group, so we do this to make sure they don't resell or stockpile the methadone, as getting access to money to buy heroin or taking an overdose is bad for everyone. We have to be very careful with these drugs though, as the case of Lisa Riding, a 45-year-old woman from the north of England, demonstrated. She'd been battling drug addiction for decades and taking her prescribed meds, but one day she was found unconscious at home. The reason? Her methadone interacted with other drugs she was taking too much of. Diazepam, amitriptyline, and fluoxetine. All these together likely put her into something called serotonin syndrome, which ended her life. That's why as doctors we need to be so careful with how often we're requesting prescriptions. If patients are requesting their prescriptions consistently 1 month before the due date, why is that? Also, if someone is showing signs of addiction or suicidal behavior, then we drop them to 2 weekly or even 1 weekly prescriptions to try and limit the likelihood that overdoses will happen. We don't take those decisions lightly though, as having to collect prescriptions every week is beyond inconvenient. I doubt House will stand for this though.
The pancreatitis wasn't set off by drugs and she hasn't been sick. That leaves trauma.
You stash your drugs in a lupus textbook. It's never lupus. Who's got gallstones and why do we care? She's 6. 6-year-olds don't get gallstones. Biliary duct is dilated. She had it, it passed to an ultrasound.
Is this where it's never lupus came from? That phrase has so much more meaning to me now. We also have another clue, pancreatitis with a dilated bile duct. What does that mean? Well, a very important part of our digestive system is something called bile that is produced by the liver and stored in the gallbladder. It's secreted into our intestines with pancreatic enzymes to help emulsify fats to absorb. Think about it like the fairy liquid of our digestive system. So how is bile made? Well, the recipe for this disgusting looking magic liquid includes a bit of fats, bile salts, and bilirubin, which is a breakdown product of blood. Get the proportions just a bit wrong, like when my mom put salt in a cake instead of sugar and it doesn't quite mix properly. That's how you get stones. So why should you care about stones? Well, the biliary tree that bile has to pass through is narrower than a fruitarian diet, which means that anything getting stuck can cause a serious backlog. House thinks the stone got stuck in the pancreatic duct, which means it could have caused the pancreas to swell up, spilling its enzymes into the blood and it causing a full system inflammatory reaction related to pancreatitis. An ultrasound could confirm if there are other stones sitting in the gallbladder, but the real investigation would be an MRCP, which is a type of MRI that looks at this tree in detail. Pancreatitis, by the way, is usually incredibly painful, so if she has it, then I'm not sure why she's screaming here, but in the fairground took the merry out of the merry-go-round. A little oversight from the writers there. If she does have gallstones though at such a young age, she almost certainly has a rare type due to a genetic disorder, as cholesterol gallstones, which are the most common in adults, would only insanely rarely form in a child.
Alice was right. Gallstones. We'd like to remove Alice's gallbladder and analyze the stones.
Not one of you has told me the truth about Dr. House. You have failed.
She's 6, Rob. She shouldn't have unnecessary surgery.
Or a moron for a mom.
Dr. Cuddy, what do you think of Dr. House? Is he as big a jerk as I think he is?
Bigger. He knows what he's talking about.
That was the fastest court decision in history. Surprised House won so quickly as well, with the charm and gentle touch of Hagrid driving a monster truck. It reminds me of a case recently that you may have heard of, Archie Battersbee. The 12-year-old boy had accidentally strangled himself and was found by his mother unresponsive on the staircase. The paramedics revived him, but he needed life support on machines as unfortunately he was brain dead. That all happened around April 2022, and the doctors advised life support should be switched off, but due to strong Christian beliefs, the parents refused. They said it's up to God to decide what happens to Archie, but it took 4 months of battling in courts, going from the High Court to the Court of Appeal, and then the Supreme Court, who all ruled in the doctor's favour. It wasn't until August 2022, though, that the machine was finally switched off. Crazy to think that the poor boy was suffering on a machine for 4 months because of this, and I hope he's now resting in peace. How do you think that case should have been dealt differently? Answers down below.
My skin hurts.
Must be allergic to something we used in the surgery.
Stones were calcium bilirubinate pigment stones. Low-grade fever, mild anemia. That plus the stones indicates bacterial infection.
Interesting, so the rash looked like it had some areas of skin loss, possibly from ruptured blisters. The base of it doesn't look like a blistering condition though, it looks like a red plaque, one that you'd actually see the beginnings of in a lupus rash. Don't tell me that's the diagnosis here. Just when House said it's never lupus, that has to be my first diagnostic guess, just for the sorry factor. The episode is also called Finding Judas, so how could that link in? Well, Judas in biblical terms was the person who betrayed Christ, so maybe the Judas here is lupus, that if personified decided to be the patient's condition just when House was in the spotlight. Maybe that leads to his secret stash getting caught out, or maybe Judas is a team member that led Tritter to search House's home. Either way, if this is lupus, I swear that would be insane.
Do a scratch test. Check for allergies. When it comes back negative, start broad-spectrum antibiotics.
House, scratch test is getting results. A lot of results.
How could she be allergic to everything?
She can't be. Has to be an infection. Just take a damn bite, okay, kid? Amazing how she didn't go into anaphylactic shock.
She is allergic. Antibiotics could cause a massive systemic reaction.
Hang the bag.
Your brother, locked up for drugs. But your boss practices medicine on drugs.
I made something of myself. He didn't.
You don't give a damn about your brother?
Tritter is really trying to put pressure on House's team and Cuddy to crack and tell him the truth about House. He's frozen Wilson's bank accounts and prescribing rights, frozen Foreman and Cameron's accounts, and probably going for chases soon as well. I see why the episode is called Finding Judas now. Tritter is pressing each member until they crack and stab House in the back. I know this is all well and good in principle, but in reality, if you know a team member is struggling with a drug problem, we would deal with this as a colleague in medicine very differently. Yes, you have loyalty to your teammate, but in the real world, there are consequences, even when people aren't on drugs. As a doctor, you have to be on the ball 24/7, and missing even the smallest detail can be catastrophic. Look at the case of Martha Mills recently, a 13-year-old girl who slipped while walking in the countryside and got a laceration to her pancreas. She was then transferred to a specialist unit where she developed an infection that wouldn't go away. This wasn't escalated, and unfortunately she lost her life on the ward without being sent to intensive care. If her doctors had recognized her deterioration earlier and escalated to intensive care, then she could have still been here today. If I were House's colleague, the first step would be to confront him and encourage he take time off to rehabilitate and get down to reasonable drug doses. After that, if there still wasn't a change, I'd have to report him to his line manager, which would be Cuddy, who already knows about the problem. After that, if there was still a concern and he was still practicing, then you'd have to go up to the state medical board. I know that sounds sounds drastic and you want to care and support your colleague, but protecting patients' lives and families is much more important. The police wouldn't get involved in a case like this, but now Tritter is trying to dangle the carrot of releasing Foreman's brother to try and get him to turn on House. Also, the parents can't agree on what management to give their daughters, so the court has given the decision-making responsibility to Cuddy. Interesting to see what happens there.
Well, if she were allergic to this antibiotic, we would have seen it by now.
She never does her homework when she's with you. She never brushes her hair.
Her heart's racing, pressure's rising. The two of you, get out.
Can't just...
You fight. She has an anxiety attack.
This is a really important point that parents don't realize. Children are like sponges. They absorb everything in their surroundings, and that includes their parents' emotional states. Does that mean there shouldn't be conflict? Absolutely not. Conflict is inevitable and children need to learn how to deal with it, as long as they see that it can get resolved. Otherwise, the experience can harm children and their emotional regulation. If you think about the kid who always has the tantrums, the friend who always leaves when things get heated or is hypersensitive, studies have shown people with these traits, the lack of ability to regulate their emotions, have fewer friends, less academic success, and are ultimately less satisfied with life. As a parent, you always need to be conscious of what example you're setting for your child and how they will then go and act in the world. Is your temperament setting them up for success or failure like these parents? Now, if you think this channel is successful at entertaining you, then check out the channel membership. You get early access to new videos, access to exclusive polls, and to suggest a series and episode for me to react to. The first 30 members have a chance to win a 1-hour one-on-one tutor session with me on a topic of your choice. We currently have 27 members with just 3 spots left, so press join now to secure your spot.
She's stiff. She can't move.
How did it all happen? Muscle rigidity is almost exclusively neurological.
House, can you focus on the case?
No! Because I'm in pain. I need more pills.
Keep it quiet. Her BP reacts to stress. You can have all the aspirin you want.
Which one of you two gave her an aspirin?
What?
Her symptoms fit Reye's syndrome, which doesn't make any sense unless she took aspirin. Where was Alice the night before she came in?
I went out. She stayed with the babysitter.
The babysitter gave the girl aspirin. It must be that. Now, we don't exactly know why aspirin is so toxic to children. What we do know, though, is that Reye's syndrome happens if a child is sensitized to aspirin, usually from a virus, and then is given it. That can cause brain swelling and liver failure. The brain swelling could lead to the muscle rigidity we saw, and apparently the liver has gone off now as well, so it definitely fits. That doesn't rule out other causes, though, and a really important alternative is toxic causes, especially heavy metal poisoning with lead. We know that when this child spends time with her dad, she doesn't do homework or have her hair brushed, so where does dad take her? If it could be a funfair ride like in the opening scene, maybe he also takes her to some old buildings or museums that are contaminated with lead paint. That'd be very spicy and is my second diagnostic guess.
We are going to use this machine to clean your blood.
You used to be someone who did the right thing. House has changed you.
What's the matter?
Oh, her hand suddenly lost its color and is painful. I would bet it's also going numb, the pulse is getting weaker, and it's going cold. How do I know that? Well, sudden pain and a pale limb strongly suggests a clot in the artery. It seems like they're filtering the blood, which wouldn't be quite accurate for Reye's syndrome treatment, but that can increase the risk of arterial clots. You'd want to scan the arm urgently to confirm the diagnosis and operate to remove the clot. You can bust it with drugs as well, and that does save the arm usually, but can lead to permanent problems like weakness or even pain, as we've seen with House. An arm can survive surprisingly long without a blood supply, around about 4 hours, so they do have some time as they found this while she was already in hospital. Interestingly though, there is one condition that we've mentioned that can make clots more likely. What was it again? Oh yeah, lupus.
Throwing a clot.
Here, I'll call the OR.
Clot's out. Ice packs aren't gonna hold it for long. Where are the blankets? You need to cool this kid down before her brain melts.
Where the hell is she?
Look at her arm.
I told you it was an infection. I asked you for broad spectrum. You put her on the bare minimum.
This girl is spiking in temperature in the sky and has this rash, previous rigidity. You'd be very concerned about sepsis caused by a bacteria named meningococcus. It causes what we call a non-blanching rash. So when you hold a glass up to it, then it doesn't go away. If I just had one blood test here, I'd want it to be a full blood count because then you'd know if it's infection and whether that's likely bacterial or viral. Bacterial would have a high neutrophil count and viral would have high lymphocytes. An incredibly useful test though that I can't believe they haven't done yet is a lumbar puncture to get the spinal fluid. I've said this more than Trump says China, but you need to do a CT of the head to make sure the pressure isn't high before doing a lumbar puncture to stop something called brain herniation, which is surprisingly not good. Treatment could be with a broad spectrum antibiotic like ceftriaxone and usually a cyclovir to cover for herpes encephalitis, which this also could very much be.
It's a good thing you failed to become a mom because you suck at it. She did have rise, and it could be varicella. They're associated. How could it be varicella, given that she's not itchy?
Because your pox causes rash, fever, and muscle pain.
Pain, not paralysis. Rocky Mountain spotted fever, on the other hand.
Now there is a diagnosis and a very impressive from the writers. You see, Rocky Mountain spotted fever causes a rash to develop around 3 to 5 days after infection. What's strange though is her rash started on her tummy earlier and then went to her arms, which is the opposite of what happens with Rocky Mountain spotted fever. The central to peripheral with fever and the kind of rash would be more consistent with typhoid fever. It could explain the other symptoms as well. Typhoid is usually spread through contaminated food or person-to-person contact. Now we know the mother left the girl with the babysitter while she was out, probably trying to find her a sibling. So in her search, she may have come across a foreign guide who happened to be sick. Then she came home and cooked up the little sweetheart a tasty meal of crackers seasoned with Salmonella typhi. That then caused all the patient's symptoms that the mum could now conveniently blame on dad. It fits so well. That will be my third and final diagnostic guess. So we are locked in.
Start the kid on chloramphenicol for Rocky Mountain spotted fever.
You told me I would fail as a mother. When I see people with their kids, it's so natural. Maybe my wanting to be a mother is like a tone-deaf person wanting to sing opera.
Chloramphenicol isn't working.
The only treatment is to cut away the infected area.
We're not even certain this was an infection.
Let's cure her with sunshine and puppies. Cute kids die of terrible illnesses. I'm gonna go do my job.
Now, House is saying the kid has necrotizing fasciitis, a flesh-eating bacteria. That would be insanely unlikely, but the type of bacteria that does cause sepsis in children, called group A strep, can cause this. There was an outbreak of this bacteria in kids recently. The thought was that because of the increased rate of respiratory viruses, the start of the bacterial infection season ended up coinciding with the viral season, causing more severe cases. Symptoms are usually a sore throat, fever for longer than 5 days, and a strawberry tongue. We were very liberally giving antibiotics in the form of penicillin V for this, to the point that there was an actual shortage. Parents were queuing up outside pharmacies at opening time with their prescriptions, and pharmacists were only fulfilling half prescriptions to ration the meds. Crazy times we live in. Necrotizing fasciitis is a devastating condition though that can cause death in around 50% of patients with treatment. The bacteria infects deep and they would now have to chop off her left arm and leg to make it happen. Final decision would be with Cuddy as well. Imagine that. Your child may have an arm or leg chopped off and you can't even stop it happening. I do not envy those parents or the surgeon, even if it is saving her life. Just give House some drugs so he can think clearly and save her limbs.
Hey, get that thing away from me. I don't want to get burned.
Maybe you should cover any sensitive... He was wrong about the puppies.
Gotta stop the surgery. She's got erythropoietic protoporphyria. She's allergic to light.
Get the hell out of my way.
No, I'm...
Erythropoietic protoporphyria. Oh, that's why she hated the merry-go-round. It was the lights that caused the immediate pain and screaming. The only thing more niche than this condition is buying a grapefruit spoon. Erythropoietic protoporphyria is a rare inherited metabolic disorder that causes toxic metabolites to build up in your body's organs that can then react with light. That can cause rashes, scarring, or even full-blown anaphylaxis. The only way to really stop it is by staying out of light. Symptoms usually start in early childhood, so it isn't quite accurate that it just begun now. This is completely different to a polymorphic light eruption, which is a rash after UV exposure. That's because of UV radiation altering a substance in the skin, leading to the rash because of inflammation. Polymorphic light eruptions don't affect internal organs or cause long-term harm, and the rash subsides easily, unlike that of erythropoietic protoporphyria. This would mean they'll save her limbs, but she can't take them outside.
Her life will be complicated, but she will live. Both of you must be carriers.
He nearly maimed a little girl. I got it right. And I told him, and it didn't matter. I'm not waiting anymore.
Chase lost his dad recently and spent his whole life looking for his dad's approval that he never got, and now was cut out of the will. Now he feels neglected and unappreciated again, just with a house instead of his dad. Tritter has been trying to play on that weakness by not freezing Chase's accounts while he freezes everyone else's to make it look like Chase is the traitor. Maybe it worked. Chase needed to lie to say his accounts were frozen when they weren't. That definitely looks suspicious. Interesting episode, but unachievable diagnosis. 6.5 out of 10 entertainment, 6 out of 10 accuracy, 7 out of 10 diagnosis. If you enjoyed this, then you may enjoy the previous one where House treats a 600-pound man right up here.